I mean, I suppose I'll start off by saying that I'm by no means a specialist in accident and emergency care issues. I'm here because I represent people who look after relatives or friends in their own homes, caring for people who are disabled, chronically sick, or become frail in older age. So more than just a relative accompanies someone to an accident emergency department if need be. I'm talking about people who are providing a great deal in many cases of personal care, nursing care, physiotherapy, other therapies to individuals within their own home, as well as having that personal and emotional connection to them. Most of the research on carers and on carers' needs and the impact of carers and their experiences tends necessarily to focus on community and community services rather than acute and hospital services, because that's where the bulk of the caring goes on. But I'd just like to reinforce the point that was made earlier about the importance of the connections and smooth communication between community services and all acute services, and perhaps particularly emergency carers. I think the main reason that emergency care is a kind of a critical interface for carers is that by the very nature you're there because of a crisis. And what happens in an emergency department can often be a turning point in whether it's actually possible for someone to stay and continue living in the home supported by a carer, or whether the caring situation comes under critical pressure. And also from our point of view, because it represents an opportunity to identify hidden carers, people who are caring without help or support for services. So there are immediate concerns about dignity and privacy and the right to family life within the hospital setting. But longer term, there are concerns about the long-term effects on the right to family life that can be occasioned by visits to hospital to accident emergency. As I've said, most of the research focuses on community services rather than hospital and acute services. But what we hear from carers about their experiences within accident emergency is that the key problems they encounter actually are the same problems that they experience in dealing with professionals in community settings as well. Most of the problems that people report to us relate to a lack of recognition of the carer and the value of their role, a lack of proactivity in identifying carers, and a lack of listening and engagement by professionals. And crucially, in terms of the big picture, improvements in these areas it doesn't actually demand additional resource. It's about listening and about communication. And I think what carers would like to see in the accident and emergency setting, as in other settings, that they're viewed not as consumers of care, but as actually partner providers in the delivery of care that need information and support to be able to do their job. So communication is key, and I suppose our feeling is that carers feel sometimes that they're ignored or they're viewed as an irritant rather than as a resource. And I think we're talking about carers, we're talking about people who are experts in the condition of the person being cared for, who can very quickly identify changes to normal behaviour that mightn't be easily assessed by professionals, no matter how well trained they are, because they don't know the individuals involved. And listening to carers and involving them in making decisions about diagnosis and treatment can be very productive. And I suppose our main plea is that issues around patient confidentiality are fully understood and correctly put into place with an accident emergency, so that concerns about patient confidentiality don't become a block to using the useful information that carers do have to contribute. Carers, of course, are juggling very complex situations, often maybe caring for more than one person. May have other demands in their lives, so decisions about treatment, admission and discharge can have a big impact. It mustn't be assumed that the carer who comes along with someone to accident emergency department can gear up or even cope with an additional level of caring. So in order to protect their own health and well-being, there needs to be a conversation about what they are and aren't able to deal with at home if the person is discharged. Ideally, we would like to see that carers get a referral for a carer's assessment, because, as I say, a trip to accident emergency is a great way to identify hidden carers who aren't currently being supported by services. And this needs to be no more than a quick conversation with the carer, handing over a leaflet on carer's assessment that each one of the trusts has already produced and has there. I mean, we've had a lot of examples, and I don't want to repeat. I know you've had lots of testimony from people and will continue to have about their own experiences of accident emergency. But we've had examples of people who have had long delays to accident emergency, and some of the delays are simply because staff have not taken information down correctly, even when the carer has tried to correct it. So they've ended up admitted and on wards with the wrong address, the wrong doctor's name, and no information about the medication, although the carer had been trying at various points during the process to get that information across. Carer's knowledge not valued and not used effectively to smooth the journey through accident emergency. We've had people concerned, particularly we get a lot of people report to us that they're concerned because they go through the out of hours GP service, the bell doc or whatever it is in the different areas, or they are admitted by ambulance. And there seems to be no distinction made in terms of triage and waiting times between people who are referred to accident emergency by another medical professional or brought and treated en route by another medical professional and people who walk in off the street. And I think there's some confusion amongst carers about why that should be. I think another point is, it's just communication again, so I won't repeat that. We've had lots of examples of people have been concerned and very anxious about how they've been treated, feeling ignored, feeling they're not being able to contribute in a way they want to the care of the people they care for. But we've got a couple of positive examples as well. I mean, one person in particular, which wasn't in this trust, it was in another trust, but was a father of two very severely disabled adult sons, very complex medical needs and behavioural issues, had to make repeated visits to Altagalvin accident emergency. And he had two problems. Firstly, his sons were both being treated by specialists in the regional hospitals in Belfast, and so to treat the sons properly, A&E doctors needed information that they didn't have, so it was up to the carer to relay that information, and they felt very keenly the responsibility of getting that very complex information right. And the second problem was that he had no one else to care for his sons, so if one was ill and had to go to A&E, the other one had to accompany him, and it was distressing and disruptive, both for the boys, for the carer, and also for the people in A&E because of the behavioural difficulties that the young people have. This particular care is one of many cares that welcome the introduction of the electronic care record because it saves them repeating that information again and again and again to umpteen different professionals in the hospital environment, and making sure that it's safe and correctly conveyed. But even before the introduction of that system, the staff at the hospital found a way to resolve the problem. So they made sure that he was able to access written notes on his son's medical history that he could carry and bring with them. So whether it was an out-of-hours doctor, whether it was a locum doctor, whether it was staff in the accident emergency service, he had the correct information, which was hugely reassuring and led to better treatment for his sons. And he was also given a card, a fast pass card by the trust. And it was very interesting to listen to what Sean had to say about the time-sensitive diagnosis, because essentially that's what it did. It alerted staff to the fact that there were time sensitivities around getting this person treated and out of accident emergency as quickly as possible. And in fact, similar arrangements were put in place later for parents of children with learning disabilities in the Southern Trust. And one of the systems I was going to commend was the health passport that's been referred to earlier on for people with learning disabilities within this trust area. So there is good practice out there, and I'm I hope one of the effects of this investigation will be to share and alert the examples of good practice that are out there, like the butterfly scheme, for example.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Because I'm conscious that's over 5 minutes, and I'm sure we'll pick up a number of themes. I wonder if I could ask you a couple of questions first, and then before I pass to colleagues. I'm interested in this carers from two perspectives. One, carers as carers who come in with the person they care for, and the other, which is an important issue for carers, which is quite often carers' health.
Yeah.
The health of carers themselves can be poorer as a result of their caring responsibilities, and A&E therefore may deal with somebody who presents with a health problem as both an individual patient but who has caring responsibilities, and therefore there are ramifications for whoever's being looked after.
Yeah.
I'll start from the carer as the carer. I mean, a lot of what you've picked up is communication and information sharing. You mentioned about the issue of confidentiality. You've got people here in the South East Trust, but they're obviously, this isn't confined to the South East Trust. I mean, if you were sitting before those in the powers to make these things happen, what are the things that you would want to say that would change things? You've mentioned the access to carers assessment. What are the problems with confidentiality, and what are the things that you think are practical solutions that deal with this?
I mean, it's difficult to know, Les, because in terms of confidentiality, there is guidance that was issued by the department that makes it clear that permission should be sought from the patient to provide information to the carer that's relevant to their care and treatment, and that where it's not possible to do that, where the person doesn't agree to that, that as much information is shared as possible without compromising patient confidentiality. And yet we still experience people who aren't involved in discussions about care and treatment, even if the person they care for wants them to be involved. And I think there is something about staff being very protective of their relationship with their patient, and I think some of it is about staff attitudes. I think there are things that could easily be shared with carers without compromising patient confidentiality that would enable them to make better choices and better contribution to the care of the person being cared for, the patient in this case. So some of it is about, I think, people understanding better what the current guidance actually says, and some of it is about maybe training and development that will reassure staff about the role and the contribution of carers. And I think probably, we would like to see all staff having some sort of care awareness training within acute settings as well as within community settings.
And my second question before I pass to Mary then is in that role of carers, if you like, as needing medical treatment, but they've got caring responsibilities. It's carers and I experience that trusts have something in place that recognise that given the proportion of people who actually provide care, that you sometimes may need to both ascertain not just what you're presenting with, but have you got other caring responsibilities? And secondly, how seamless when that becomes an issue. Somebody who's a primary carer is going to have to go into hospital, for example. How seamless is the process of health and social care in terms of then perhaps having to move very quickly in terms of the issue of somebody else being cared for now losing their primary carer?
I mean, it's not seamless is the straightforward answer. Again, I have to start off by saying that inevitably the people who contact us are the people who have difficulties and problems with obtaining the care and support that they need. So we're more likely to hear the bad news stories than the good news stories, but certainly we've experienced people who, a woman who's admitted with heart condition and ended up on the phone in the corridor trying desperately to find someone to look after her disabled son while she was in the hospital. And I think some of it is, I was reassured to hear what was being said today about the links with the social work department and the fact that representatives from social work departments are in the planning meetings or involved and engaged in that. because that, I think, is a critical connection that isn't always made. I think the social work teams within the hospital are not always engaged as early as they could be, and some of that, I think, is about the right questions not being asked, and some of that, I think, is about focus on the medical issues as opposed to all the other issues that people bring into accident emergency with them. So I think that those links between accident emergency and the social work team are critical. And I think also one of the things that's critical is the community service side of it. Because actually, if carers are offered a carers assessment and have a chance to take up a carers assessment, there is an element of that includes emergency planning. And it allows community social work staff to sit down with the carer and go through the what will happen if. And if that was in place, I think these kinds of things would be much easier, because there would be a plan, or at the very least a set of contact details that the trust was aware of and that the carer was aware of that could go into place. Not enough carers assessments are being done, and I think not enough attention is being paid to that part of the assessment, which is a hugely valuable thing if it's done properly.
Okay, thank you. Marion.
Hi Helen, just one question, and it's relating to carers who would have particular needs, and I'm wondering if your organisation has picked up or identified any particular needs of carers, such as children, people with mental health problems, or people who don't have English as first language, and have you identified problems, and be any suggestions for addressing them?
Well, I think there's a perception somehow that community care is care provided by the young and fit for the old and infirm, and that's not the case. There are many people who themselves have disabilities, and as you've identified, many young people who have caring responsibilities. In terms of hospital treatment generally, we worked with the department a number of years ago on a discharge guide for carers that has 3 parts. There was guidance in it for managers within hospital settings about developing policies and procedures that would work for carers. There was guidance for staff on the wards, nursing staff or bed managers who are actually dealing with carers and family members on discharge, and there was guidance for carers about what they should be looking for, what they should be expecting, how they could go about getting help. And certainly within that guidance, we made sure that we flagged up that people may need to be communicated with in different medium or different media. We also flagged up that where there were children involved in visiting, that there was a need to check out whether they in fact were taking on a caring role, particularly if there weren't other visitors coming, so that carers could be identified and supported properly. So there is existing guidance there that was circulated by the department to all the hospitals. I think there's something about the pace with A&E that doesn't necessarily lend itself very easily to the sort of discussions that need to be engaged in a normal discharge process. But I think there are elements within that guidance that would be very helpful, even if people are being discharged from A&E after a number of hours rather than days or weeks of a stay.
Paul. Thanks. Just one question, Helen. You might have heard my earlier points when talking with Sean, Ruth and Jill about participation, and I wondered if you've got any views about this, whether or not whether or not we should be thinking about trying to enhance public participation in what are, after all, public institutions. And I know there's the 10,000 voices, maybe that's sufficient. Mm-hmm. There's also the patient-client council, but I'm not talking about a sort of complaints process. I just mean a community voice in important public institutions. But I also know it's really hard to do this. And briefly, because I think we're out of time, I wondered if you have any brief reflections on this. Is this something that should be enhanced or not?
Yes, I think it should be enhanced. I think one of the useful mechanisms that already exists that could be tailored for this is that each of the health and social care trusts in Northern Ireland does have a care reference group or care steering group. The name varies from trust to trust. They tend to be run by community services, and they're an opportunity for staff from different teams and different professions to get together with carers who are caring for people in different situations to talk about some of the issues that are associated with delivering services. In some areas, I know there's a place for representative of acute services within that forum. In other trusts, there may not be. So I think drawing hospital staff or key champions within hospital into the existing carer training mechanisms would be one way of having more dialogue and more discussion, raising issues. I mean, it's very interesting because in terms of accident emergency, you know, the hospitals are dealing with customers who just don't want to be there. And actually one of the best ways to improve the service would be to stop more people coming in the first place, so that people aren't coming in unnecessarily, and so the pressures on staff to deal with people and the waits that we see aren't an issue. And I was particularly pleased to hear Sean McGivern talking about the need to do a little bit more work with nursing homes and people being transported, effectively being transported to hospital to die, because that's not what anyone wants. So there are things like that. The other thing that would be helpful, I think, carers at the moment in the community are providing care for very complex medical cases. Catheter management is commonplace, peg tube feeding is more common now. They're taking on some very complex nursing tasks without necessarily the training or the backup to deal with it. And I think, again, looking at community services and what can be done in the community to avoid pressures on accident and emergency, providing better training for carers who are caring at home and providing better backup out of hours would be most helpful.
Okay, thanks, Helen.
It's a very quick solidarity. The carers reference groups are really important groups, and I know that they work very effectively. Has any, in your experience, carers reference group ever had an interface with a kind of A&E in any of the trusts?
In any of the trusts, not as far as I'm aware. Certainly, as I say, I know that some hospitals have occasionally sent representatives, but they don't feel very well tied into that process to me.
Okay, thank you.